Yeah, what's cracking, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Prison Break Raw. I'm your host, the one and only Big JD. Have any of you been watching this latest Netflix series called The Night Stalker? I can tell you firsthand what it was like to experience that summer of '85, growing up in the Southern California area where he was terrorizing. Where I grew up around the border of North Orange County and southeast Los Angeles. He was running all through there, even further back into Orange County and down up in as far as northeast LA. He's even done some murders in San Francisco. The summer of '85 was a hot one. And if you didn't leave your window open, you were going to roast in that place. A lot of houses didn't have central air conditioning. We didn't really have much of central air conditioning. We relied on fans, box fans. Stick it in the window and let it blow, you know what I mean? But the summer of '85, I pretty much became a man because that's when I first learned how to completely break down, maintain, clean, and operate a firearm. My father taught me it was the best thing that he could do in the hopes that all of us could defend the home. If this fucking weirdo, pedophile, rapist, nutcase, seat-sniffing serial killer was going to show up. We did everything to prevent it if in case of it did come. My bedroom window had like a small little balcony just below it. Well, it was kind of like a roof that covered the porch. It was a covered porch. You could jump up onto the fence, climb up that, and get right in the window. So we poured gravel all down. In that case, if anybody walks on it, it's just going to make a lot of noise. Then we super glued razor blades all around the screen and the window seal and put nails all in there. We did all of that shit. My father went out and bought a Winchester 12-gauge shotgun and extended the chamber so it could hold more shells, taught my mom how to operate it. Instead of putting it on her shoulder, to put it on her hip and just letting it spray. He gave me a .22 rifle and taught me how to squeeze the trigger, not pull the trigger. How to aim, how to go up, everything. My older sister learned how to operate a firearm the same way, not so much my little sister, though. But it was a scary time because Richard Ramirez wasn't the usual serial killer. He didn't have a profile. He just indiscriminately killed anything that was in his path. If he was able to get into your house, the first person that he was going to kill was the man in the house. Then he was going after whatever woman was in there, and it didn't matter how old she was. She could be as far up as her 80s. She could be as young as in her teens. He targeted everybody, and he used anything and everything. He's used a hammer, a machete, a gun, knives, cords, anything and everything. I mean, this dude was sick. He cut people's eyes out, all of that shit. A lot of these details were kept out of the media because of the investigation. They didn't want to, give him too much information to where he would change anything. But what limited information we got was that he had no profile. He would kill anybody. He was even kidnapping children and molesting them, boys and girls. I mean, this dude was just an all-around sick character. And to live through that, it was a trip. And my grandmother, who lived with us, was the most worried, and she had her own handgun as well. Everybody was strapped. Imagine if a guy like that was to show up these days. You know what I mean? That long waiting list that you're going to have to wait through because of all the liberal policies against guns in that state. You would basically be having to fend for yourself. You better learn martial arts. But as we all know, that may not save you either. So yeah, it was a tough time, but the one thing that the series never touched on, because they coined it and they kind of modeled it on a good versus evil thing. There's still some people out there that are all caught up in that satanic panic that plagued this country back in the 80s. The one thing that the series did not really go into detail about is who was Richard Ramirez? Like, what was he really about? You'd have to go back and look at some other resources in order to find the information. But I remember when I was into psychology and I was studying behavioral science, I actually read a lot about Richard Ramirez and learned a great deal about his upbringing. And if you were ever to say that somebody was a product of his environment, it was definitely this guy. So check out Richard Ramirez's father, first off. He was a very violent, angry dude who worked on the railroad, and he used to abuse Richard and the rest of the kids quite often. Whenever he was around, of course, when he wasn't working. He even took young Richard Ramirez one time, chained him up in a cemetery overnight. But that wasn't all. Richard Ramirez's cousin Mike, who was in Vietnam, when he got back, he used to show young Richard all the pictures of the women that they used to rape in these villages. Richard Ramirez and his cousin Mike spent a lot of time together to the point to where Mike's wife found it to be odd. Who knows what kind of a relationship they really had? Because you got to look at it as that Richard Ramirez was out molesting all kinds of kids, boys and girls. So it kind of makes you wonder just exactly what kind of a relationship they might have had. What kind of a person Mike was. He was obviously disturbed. Whatever happened to him in Vietnam obviously damaged him. So he was teaching Richard Ramirez all kinds of different tactics, army tactics, how to have stealth, and how to sneak around, how to break into stuff. And his brother, Richard Ramirez's brother, was already breaking into shit. Another thing that it didn't really go into detail about is the 2 head injuries that Richard Ramirez suffered and the fact that he was epileptic. He suffered a brain injury where he got hit, had several stitches when he was younger, and he also fell off of a swing set or got hit by a swing in the head. Could all this contributed to his weirdness, or was he just born evil? According to the label that was given to him during, like I said, the Satanic panic time. But the one thing about the Satanic panic that was detrimental to everybody and everything was the fact that it's always going to draw out the weirdos. No matter what you try to do, you bring this information out, you're trying to use it as a warning or to try to educate people on something that was a conspiracy theory from the gate. You're going to get a lot of weirdos that are going to latch onto that and use that in order to gain notoriety and fame. And I think that's more what he did. But this guy was obsessed with death and killing. After watching his cousin Mike shoot his own wife in front of him, he was sold on the idea of going out there killing people, raping women, and doing everything that he did. So as a young man, he got on a Greyhound bus and went out to Los Angeles. He got all strung out on cocaine and started using PCP and raped a woman. And then finally, with the Satanic panic and everything that caught his attention, that got his nose open to it all, he gets on a bus and goes to San Francisco to visit Anton LaVey at the Church of Satan. So now that was going to be his brand. He was going to use that in order to instill fear. And furthermore, he didn't have like one kind of a target. He targeted anything and everybody, like I said, that got in his way. So he came back and he started in with all the Satanism, telling people to swear to Satan as he was raping these women, bashing people in the face with hammers and everything else. Then he started to draw pentagrams up on the walls and stuff. Once they started calling him the Night Stalker, he started telling people, tell him the Night Stalker was here. But the media botched a lot of this shit by letting out some key details and evidence that was left behind the scenes by Richard Ramirez himself. Specifically his shoe, of which was a unique shoe at the time, the Avia shoe. Not too many of them out there. And that was their biggest piece of evidence that they were going to use to link him to these murders. And it was probably the reason why the Higgins girl, why her murder never got solved, because of course it was a different shoe. So this went on for months. Like I said, it went on all through the summer. And in our house alone, it was hot because we bolted all the windows shut. I mean, you would literally be waking up in a puddle of your own sweat. But that .22 rifle was right there next to me, and I would have used it. At least that's what I told myself over and over and over again. I still remember the one time that my dad even scared the shit out of my grandma. Put a mask on, dressed all up in black, and hid in her closet, and just came at her with a rubber knife, pretending he was a Night Stalker. It scared the shit out of her. And she was just inches away from grabbing her own pistol and blowing his head off. And believe me, she would have done it. So this is the kind of terror that everybody had to live through all those months. And when he was finally caught, there were some people that were actually even in denial that it was even him. Some people were still scared. I questioned it myself, and I was young. But yeah, to live through that time, to go through all that stuff, to wonder and worry if this fool's going to show up and what window he's going to get into. The easiest window in the whole house to get through was mine. Many, many nights I sat there and wasn't able to sleep. It was crazy. It was nuts. But these serial killers have always kind of fascinated me. But most of them always have like a profile, and this one did not. So what made him so unique? He never became like the most famous serial killer of them all. I mean, he wasn't like anybody else like Ted Bundy or whatnot. But Ted Bundy had a profile. But damn, man, he had everybody living in fear back in those days. But yeah, go check out the series. But like I said, the one thing that the series didn't mention, really so much, didn't touch on it, was his upbringing. You would have to ask yourself, was he programmed to be this way from the exposure that he got from his own cousin Mike, from the way his father treated him? Did he learn how to break into all these houses from his brother? These are the kind of questions that we really need to start asking nowadays. Outside of focusing on all this law enforcement type stuff and personal choice. Some people are programmed to be the way they are. We have to recognize that and acknowledge it for what it is, because that's exactly what it is. So what can we possibly do to understand what makes a serial killer in the future? Is you'd have to look for these signs. You'd have to look at exactly what kind of environment this potential young serial killer is growing up in, what they're being exposed to. And to also understand that when people are trying to educate the public on, let's say, terrorism, or in this case, Satanism, just exactly how's that information being used and applied? Is it being used and applied for the good, or is somebody going to use that for the shock and awe? Apparently, Richard Ramirez used it for the shock and awe value. Just an interesting topic that I thought I would share with all of yous. What it was like for all of us to experience that. And if you didn't grow up in Southern California during the summer of 1985, you wouldn't know exactly how it was that we were feeling. But it was a trip, and it was scary. But the one thing that I got out of the whole thing, I guess if there was a silver lining to any of that craziness and the grotesque manner for which he killed, was it was the first time I learned how to operate firearms. It's one of the greatest gifts I could have gotten from my father, and it's one of the greatest gifts that any child can get from their parents nowadays. Because you never know when another Richard Ramirez might pop up and invade your neighborhood. You already know what it is. You heard it right here. Prison Break Raw, uncut, uncensored, no holds barred, not sugarcoat, not politically correct, all up in your face, slapping you with that dick of reality. And I'm out.